All right, just waiting for everything to settle down. Hello, my name is Imogen Mellor. I am, it's hard to describe my job, but I work on the puzzle section at The Telegraph, though I am a former games journalist for PC Gamer. Today, we are talking about voice acting. The official name of the talk is Improving Game Quality Through Professional Voice Acting. I am joined by Annabelle.
Hello.
And Joseph.
Hello.
And they have worked on a plethora of games each side. Sea of Thieves, and Annabelle has worked on Sea of Thieves, a Warhammer game, Divinity Original Sin 2, and Joseph has voice acted in Sniper Elite 5, Game of Thrones, a couple of Lego games, Horizon Forbidden West, but you are both best known as the main characters of It Takes Two. And so, let's talk a little bit about how that kind of started. How did you find yourselves as the two main characters and the book, the amazing book, in It Takes Two?
Well, it started like it does with any video game project. You get asked to do a self-tape, and sometimes you're asked to just do a voice tape, and you just get given some sides from the game. But with this, they wanted a full-body self-tape because we're going to be doing motion capture. And I think we had to film a couple of scenes at home, and that was the first stage of the casting process. And then we got asked to do a recall, and then they got us in the room with Joseph and some other guys from Hazelight, Joseph Fares, and they were testing different couples, like a sort of chemistry read, and to see our physicality and hear our voices. And they played around a bit. They got us to improvise. They got me to do it British. They got me to do it American. They had you reading for Hakeem as well. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and then we found out we got the job. And then about 5 months later, we did the first shoot in Stockholm. And then that happened over 2 years. We'd go over and film for 2 or 3 days every month or every 2 months.
Yeah. That's exactly right. It was unusual because most game auditions start with just an MP3 file that you send off to your agent, and this one they wanted like a normal self-tape that you would send off for a in front of camera job. And I remember they sent me Annabelle's details to see if we wanted to meet beforehand to have a chat, which again is highly unusual.
That never happens.
And it's never happened before or since. And so we met in this tiny little hotel off Leicester Square, and kind of like, it was almost like a blind date from the beginning, because it was like, hi. Yeah. This is weird, right?
And we didn't even buy a drink. We just pretended that we had someone staying in the hotel.
Yeah, exactly.
And sat in this very expensive hotel lobby.
And then we were like, I don't know what this is going to be like. Anyway, and Joseph, as you probably all know, is a force of nature. And he's not like anyone else I've ever been in an audition room with. Like, it was full energy, full Fares straight away. Mm-hmm. And we were both... And the audition consequently was really quite fun, because he basically threw we did the sides of the scenes that he'd prepared, which was a May and Cody scene, and then he got us to improvise. I think at that point he was really taken with the idea of It Takes Two being kind of like he loved When Harry Met Sally. It's one of his favorite films.
And he put that in the brief. For the initial audition, it said it's a bit of a romantic comedy. Yeah. Think When Harry Met Sally. Right.
And so which again, for a games audition, I was like, this is really unusual.
Yeah.
And you want to do a rom-com but it starts with a divorce. Okay, and then, so we improvised this sort of scene that, the therapy scenes in When Harry Met Sally, where they have all the real couples. Mm-hmm. And so we improvised a sort of scene of that nature. And then he was like, okay, great. Yeah, I really like, and he was saying, remember, he was like, I really like you guys. I think you basically got it, but we're just going to
There's another couple waiting outside, but I think I like you guys.
And we were both like just looking at us like, okay, this guy's insane. And then he got me to read the Hakeem, almost like it seemed like an afterthought. He's like, hold on a minute, why don't you read this book character? Mm-hmm. And he was like, I don't really know, but do you want to do it in because I'm Mexican. I'm half Mexican and half American. My mum's from the US. I was born in Mexico, my dad's Mexican, and I moved to England when I was 10 years old. So I'm all over the shop, really.
Right.
And so he was like, try a Hispanic voice or whatever. I was like, okay, because it's a book of love. So he was like, okay, maybe try Banderas vibes. And so Hakeem was born in that room.
That's so funny.
But you didn't know you were going to get those
No, I didn't know that
parts.
at all. We didn't know any of it.
It was
And
two for the price of one with the flights out to Stockholm, basically.
yeah, it was a very unusual experience from its inception, and through when we got to Stockholm, it was just a real journey of discovery for both of us because we hadn't done.
Well, I'd never done motion capture before. Had you?
I had done one motion capture job years ago for Sony, like literally before motion capture was really being done very much. And in fact, the game never even became a game. I think it was just a explorative project. So no, essentially no. And so for both of us, we were on the same graph of learning in terms of.
And it was a very different experience because of going over so frequently and working. Obviously, when you're voicing a game, it's just you in the studio with the engineer on the other side of the glass, and that's it. You might get your lines the night before, sometimes you're going in cold, but with this, it was a totally different experience because we were always in the room together, we'd have lunch every time together, which meant it felt much more of a collaborative thing, and because they're not British or American, they were very happy for us to help with the script and edit a bit, and that would sound more British if I said it like this, or this would sound better in this. And so we had a lot of input, and they were really open to our ideas, weren't they?
And they were really open to improvisation all the way through, which was great because we shot it in sequence. So we literally began at the beginning and finished at the end 2 years later. So there was that never happens in any, even if you. Whether it's filming a TV show or whether it's a game, you never do that. You never get to do that way. And that was another element that was completely unique in terms of an acting process, to be able to take the arc of a story from its literal beginning to its literal ending and have such ownership and input into what became these people through this story it was like a sort of big present with a big bow on it, because that never happens to an actor.
No.
Very rarely, at least, anyway.
Do you think that over those, from beginning to end, do you think that helped evolve the characters and the improv and the changes you'd make?
Definitely.
Yeah, because we started,
If
totally.
you were in a room, if I hadn't met Pepe, if I was just saying those lines isolated and not having them back and not being able to react to his lines in the moment, it'd be a totally different performance. And it really helped that we got to know each other, and then we had that confidence to suggest other stuff and just to play off each other. Definitely helped, didn't it?
Yeah, totally. And it was interesting as well because, when you shoot a cutscene, or the way they shot it at least, you had to do the entire cutscene from beginning to end without stopping. So there was no breaks. So basically, if you fucked up a line, you just either had to carry on and it stayed, or we're all adults, it's fine. So it was essentially very different to any other video capture film experience acting, where if you're cutting all the time, it's all edited, but they do that afterwards.
And Joseph would play back the scene straight away. Every single take we would see immediately.
They would only keep one.
Yeah, did they? Yeah.
He would decide which take was the one he was keeping to do it in that moment, and then we moved on, but not until that point. And so therefore, it wasn't, again, like any other video game where you only record your voice, for example, because
you often give two or three versions.
You never learn your lines when you record a video game. You just have a spreadsheet. You go into a studio, a booth, you have a spreadsheet of lines, and you just pound through them all. But you're reading them. You're not off book for any of it. So the character development is totally different to what this was. This was like any other acting job. It was whether you were doing a play or a
But you had the
film
benefit of seeing each take back immediately, but not as us in our mocap suits, you know, we saw us as Cody and May,
Yeah.
as developed as they were at that particular stage of the process. You know, so there I could see myself with my blue hair and whatever, and I'd see, oh, it doesn't quite work there when I lift up my hand like that. And when I've gone to scratch my head, it actually looks like my hand's going through my head, so I won't do that move on the next take. So you could really play around and learn from what you were doing as you went on as well.
And we even had a screen, actually, that was there live, so you could see that as you did it. It was being played back in real time, which, again, and it was such a, we would get through, I want to say like 30 sides of material in 3 days, which if you transfer that to the amount of sides you would get through in a film or a TV show, that would take 3 months.
Yeah. One of the things that Annabelle and I talked about was that it's a completely sort of different form of acting in some ways, because you've got the theatre of like kind of going through the motions and being in the physical space, but not having to do the kind of like TV-esque, oh, this is the shot, so you have to like do it over and over and over again. And yeah, can you talk a little bit more about how this really feels different from acting in other spaces that you've worked in, and what motion capture felt like to you, like, and the benefits of that?
Yeah, because I wasn't sure when I first went for a mocap audition how big you had to be. I think this was slightly different as well, because we were playing very real people. You know, we were playing, and the language is very naturalistic. You know, other video games I've done when I've just voiced them, you're playing an animal, or you're playing someone ethereal, or, you know, fantasy. And because these were two human beings going through very personal stuff that you could relate to, it had to feel real. But the difference
Even though they were in a completely crazy world.
Yeah, and they were shrunk into dolls, but the fact that you're in this big studio and there's cameras everywhere, you have the freedom to sort of move around like you would on a stage. So it's a sort of cross between both, wasn't it?
I found that the main, it is definitely, there's a fine line between finding the physical, especially because we were playing characters who were toys, essentially. So there was a physicality that had to...
Yeah, you've got to be big enough for stuff to read.
Had to sort of read in that sense, exactly as you say. But then also have that naturalism and that reality that the characters have because they were real people. And so essentially what I noticed was that your close-up, if you like, became vocal.
Yeah.
Because you don't have a close-up, because they put that close-up in later. So all you have is however many, 360 degrees of whatever it was, 60 cameras or whatever in that room. And so you don't have anyone, you don't have a point of focus in the way that you do when you do a TV show or a film, where you know exactly where that camera is. Because it's everywhere. And so consequently, it feels theatrical because you're just in a room playing a scene with another actor. And yet your vocal performance has to be that of a film or TV performance. So it's a massive challenge, and it's a really exciting one. It was invigorating, and it was really fun to
And it's fast, because you're not
that.
waiting for new setups, you're not doing costume changes, so you just go from one scene to the next, to the next, to the next.
Yeah.
It was very quick. I mean, there were exhausting days because you're doing so much in one day, but you weren't sitting getting bored between scenes.
Hell no.
So what was your first day in motion capture like? What was that first day like?
That was weird, because they did because at the beginning of It Takes Two, we're not the dolls, we are Cody and May as the adults, so it was a sort of heightened version of how we look in real life. So do you remember they did those 3D, you just had to sit very still and this machine sort of went around your face, I remember. I don't know, and then we had no idea, like you say, we thought, what the heck is this? Who's going to play a video game about a couple getting divorced?
She was really down on the whole thing at first.
I just thought, I can't imagine who's going to play
this. This is never going to work.
And they went through the story, and then he started showing us some of the very, initial early stage graphics, and it did look amazing even then, didn't it? Suddenly it was like, oh wow, it looks like a pixel,
Pixar film,
Pixar.
Not Pixel.
It's not Pixar.
It was very unpixelated.
Yeah.
It was a strange beginning, because they were just mapping our faces, which is what they needed to continue with the animation or whatever. And so it was a very technical start, and then at the beginning of every day, you've got to do
Oh,
I always felt it was like
calibration.
where you get calibrated. I always felt like it was super futuristic. It was like Tron or something. Like,
I never
it's
quite
time for
understood what that
calibration.
was, but yes, you have to do certain moves with your
And yeah,
leg,
so
arms
you
and
do
legs
lots of
to check
things
it.
so that the computer understands
Can
your
read
body.
every bit of your body, yeah.
With
Yeah.
the really attractive suits. That's the thing that I was like, oh, this isn't so sexy. I'm not feeling this vibe at all.
I prefer seeing myself on the screen as May.
Me
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
I looked way better as the clay doll than I did as me in that suit.
And I guess in the theme of improving voice acting, I guess motion capture really heightens what voice acting in some ways can be, because you do have that physical nature. And yeah, you're saying that like it's so different from being in a sound booth with an engineer being like, okay, next line.
I mean, I think you can get, obviously you can get that just in a sound booth, and it's like doing radio drama, but it's better when you're in the room with the other characters. And we did do some of that because we went into lockdown sort of 2/3 of the way through making the game, but we were still able to get into a studio in London and do some of the scenes and some of the ADR.
Pretty much done all the mocap, hadn't
Yes.
we? I remember being in Stockholm when the news was breaking about the pandemic starting in China. And then I remember being in our room and packing and stuff.
No, and watching on the news, Italy shut down, Spain shut down, and we were in Stockholm, which never shut down.
Yeah, yeah.
Seems,
yeah, that was the thing, is that when we went back in that October, I think it was, and Stockholm and Sweden hadn't done any of the
masks or anything.
Distancing or any of the shutting things down. And it was like going back in time, because we just had the whole summer and the first spring of being in lockdown in London, where everyone was like isolated. It was our first like dip toe back into doing work, and we went to Stockholm where it was like nothing ever happened. It was really bizarre, that aspect of it. But yeah, sadly it finished when we were kind of in London, and
we
were
thought
in this
we were going to go for another
distant
trip,
sort
and it
of
didn't
like
happen. But
studio and stuff.
And we were together at first in the studio, but then rules became stricter here, and then we weren't even allowed in the same studio. So obviously it's much better when you can bounce off each other, but by then we knew the characters inside out.
We'd done
all the main scenes, so it was fine.
Right.
Yeah.
I would guess. So when did you finish the acting then and filming?
So it was towards the end of 2020.
Yes, we did another visit in October 2020.
Yeah, and then we had a few voice stuff.
And then I think the game got launched 21, spring 21, I think.
Yeah,
did it?
Because it won.
I think
it won Game of the Year. I think.
Yes,
in beginning of 2022.
Okay, yeah.
I think.
Yes.
So when did you know that? You said you were quite down on it at first at the idea of playing it.
Well, no, Joseph would tell us every day, "This is an amazing project. This is going to win awards." I mean, he was not shy in coming forward about how successful he thought the game would be.
Is the most like positive. Like he is. I've never met anyone who has as much belief in himself to the point where you kind of borderline think like, is it too much? Like, I'm not sure.
I mean, it is too much.
It turns out that he was
right.
Like, I mean,
he was right.
Everything he talked about the whole way through was like, yeah, that happened. Yeah, we went to the BAFTAs last year. Yeah, it did win Game of the Year. And like, he manifested his reality. Like, it was crazy. And, I think Annabelle being English and more like, come on, let's not be too, he's just like, fuck that. I'm amazing.
But then as we'd go back to Stockholm each time, they'd show us little clips,
Yeah.
they'd show us some of the cutscenes, and we were like, oh, actually, this looks quite good.
Yeah, it was one of those where you're like, holy crap, what you guys are doing here is incredible. It was just, and they were all so enthusiastic and so professional and so like, helpful, and just like every time we went to Stockholm, me and Annabelle we both have small kids and stuff, so it was always like a little mini holiday where we'd have in this lovely hotel they put us up in that one of the dudes from ABBA owns. And it was just the most magic job, because the job itself was just so brilliant. The characters became ours, our ownership in a sense. And it was weird as we started getting going with it, because Joseph did the mocap for Hakim.
Yeah.
So Joseph would be there doing his Hakim, and I didn't actually start recording the voice for Hakim until
much
halfway
later,
through, I think. So we'd already been recording for like maybe a year or 9 months before I did any voice recording for Hakim, which I did after us. So we would do the mocap of all the whatever we were doing, and then I started to record the voice in Stockholm straight after our mocap sessions, like that week, in that space of time. And I remember it was a really weird thing, because it was almost like a sort of mesh of dubbing in a way. Like I've done a little bit of dubbing work, and it was a bit like that, because you're trying to, like, Joseph's physicality was so crazy.
He didn't stop gyrating, basically.
Yeah, and so and also I'd been acting opposite him, doing those scenes as Cody, with Joseph's voice of how he sometimes frequently didn't get the lines right at all, because he never really learned them. He just kind of approximated them.
Yeah.
And so then when I had to
make your lines fit,
essentially dub his performance in mocap with my voice, of Hakim's voice, it was like a real challenge to match his energy, and which is where I think his energy vocally came from, essentially, was because Joseph was insane.
Yeah.
And made some really weird choices. And so it was quite I was just trying to, and also just trying to not have his cadence in my head.
Yeah.
He's, Lebanese, but he's also grew up and, spent most of his life in Sweden. So, and he's got a very unique way of speaking. And so I was also trying to and because I'd been in the room with him performing opposite me doing it, trying to isolate myself away, just taking Fares out of my head and focusing on this little mocap figure that I was watching when I was doing the vocal recording for Hakim was a real challenge, and but also super fun, because Hakim is just a very unique
character
creation. that me and Joseph also in the end believed it was a very beautiful synergy of him and me, and we did become one essentially after that.
I remember because I was talking about this on stream, because I stream, and I was like, I'm doing this talk, the voice actors of Cody and Hakim and May, and lots of people in my audience went, "Isn't Joseph Hakim?" And I was like, okay, the voice actor is someone else. But yeah, it's very funny that a lot of people don't realize that it's two people who play Hakim, in tangent together, because that's
I just did his voice.
Unusual,
I did his voice, and and Joseph did the body movements. So I guess his little face inside the book was based on my face, but that's about it. Just how he sounds and his silly little face in his book.
Also, something we also mentioned when we had that chat was that one of the initial testing sort of scenes that you kind of played out together was the elephant scene.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that might have even been one of the audition scenes. I can't remember now. I remember one of the audition scenes was...
Was it?
It was, one of them was looking around the room for which toy would
get
down, choosing Cutie the elephant, who we going to kill. Yeah. And again, I thought, that's weird, But then that game was talked about more than that scene was talked about more than any other scene in the game.
That scene has been the one that stuck with people a lot,
Yeah, it's honestly, watching it play out for the first time, unforgettable gaming experience.
I remember when we were doing it.
Yeah.
It was, at that point, because we were essentially, I guess we were maybe halfway through-ish. But at that point, I feel like it was around, it was front half nearing the middle point of filming. And we were so okay, what's the crazy shit's going to happen this time? And it just seemed totally normal that we would just be torturing this fucking elephant and chucking it over the edge.
Also,
at the time it was so what's happened next? It's how we get to the next stage. So it's got to be done.
We were always carrying around these big cardboard cutout props, which were just standing in for, what May's got this big... what was it May had?
Some amazing
nail gun
2000 or whatever.
Some big gun thing, I don't know, but anyway. And I just
Annabelle in this enormous cardboard
just
2D cutout thing.
The 3-year-olds made it or something.
That was bigger than she was. And she'd be wielding it around. And it was hard to not laugh all the way through because she was like, so how does this work? I don't know. And I'd be like, well, you're going to put someone's eye out with that.
No, there's a lot of jumping in and out of scenes as well, wasn't there? Yeah.
Well, every scene started with like,
okay,
oh
gosh, where are we now? Okay.
I guess you have to, because they kind of like...
the cutscene, you bring a new land, a new place, a new part of the house or garden or whatever,
They'd be like, I don't know, you flew in from somewhere.
Yeah.
And I guess there's also one of the best things I think about It Takes Two for me was the kind of physical comedy of killing each other and having that like back and forth of the characters. I played it with my little sister, which did not help with like her just launching me off the edge of something a few times.
Yeah.
And me being like, I'm going to tell Mum about this if you don't stop.
Well, I think actually it almost saved my children in lockdown because they were fighting the whole time, and then they started playing It Takes Two, and of course you've got to collaborate together. And they actually worked as a team, and my daughter found it quite hard, but my son was better, so he was having to help her. And it was and didn't some couple get engaged playing it or something?
Did they?
Yes, they were playing it together, and they got engaged when they finished the game.
Oh, that's so sweet.
So yes, responsible for marriages as well. Yeah.
just giving. That's all it's about. I mean, like, it's so weird, like, the amount of people that I have come across who I don't associate with gaming, in a sense, that have played this, because I think a lot of people have used the game to entice their other half.
Yes,
whether they
absolutely.
are the male half or the female half or whatever, like, they're just like, come and play this thing that I'm into, and, like, maybe you won't be such a, game widow or whatever, and like it has. I think that's one of the great things about that. One of the genius things about the game, which we can't take any credit for at all, really. But that's just like in terms of how the mechanics and the narrative of the game is infused in the play of the game. Is what I think makes the game so unique, and I think probably will be enduring because.
There's not many in that genre, are there, of the sort of romantic comedy, or will they get together? What happens if they do or if they don't?
Yeah,
I think it's pretty unique in that way.
Yeah, it's unique in lots of ways. The subject matter, the kind of like style of it, and the genuine collaboration that has to take place. Like at no point is one player like really ahead of each other. No. It's perfectly balanced between like your usefulness.
You need the other one to get shit done, right? So
And the constant change of game mechanics, new things, new weapons, new ideas. Like you never get bored of anything too long because it's just kind of evolving at all points.
Yeah, exactly.
It's such fun. When it came out, I guess first of all, what was your reaction to reviews? And then second of all, you said that you have noticed that some people have been enticing other halves. Did you go and watch other people playing it, seeing what their reaction was?
But my daughter is still playing it now because she's only 10 now. So when it first came out, she was only just getting to grips with playing. They played the whole thing. My kids went through it. But now, and it's the only thing my kids have thought was cool that I've done in my whole career, But now she's got friends who come around and she's like, "Can we do It Takes Two?" And she's played it. So I think she's got to the same point so many times with different friends, and then she has to ask her brother, my son, to go and help because some of it's really hard, isn't it? I mean, I haven't played it. I've just watched them play it. But from what I hear, some of it is quite tricky. So in our house, they're still playing it. But it was exciting, wasn't it?
I went over to one of my mates' houses who's a really big gamer, and he was like, because he got it before, he didn't know I was in it, and he bought the game on his own Steam, and he called. I remember him calling me up, and he was like, "Mate, I just started playing It Takes Two." And I was like, okay, why you got that weird voice on it? He was like, you have to come over because I can't believe that you're in it. It's one of the favorite games I've ever played back. Because I know he's super into games. And so I was like, really? You want me to go? He's like, yeah, so we got a takeaway. And he was like, come on. And he played with his husband. And we just I watched them play the game because I tried and I was shit. So I was like, I don't want to be rubbish at this. I just you guys play and I'll just watch. And it was actually really fun.
Yeah.
I had a great time watching them because it was hilarious watching their interact. Like what I found amazing about it was just how it makes people communicate. And I think, your communication in gaming when you're, whatever kind of game you're playing, if it's a one player, you can be involved with talking to lots of people, but it's all cerebral, it's all in your head. And I think there's something so amazing about the visceral reality of having someone that you physically have to play with versus someone who is virtually out there in the cyberspace that you're playing with or next to or alongside of or whatever, which makes it like amazing. And it makes it like you could just film it because it's so hilarious the way like the things that it makes you do and say and how it, you know, like you said, like it taps into the relationship that the two people playing the game have.
Absolutely.
And tests those boundaries and stretches those connections in a really interesting way.
Yeah, I mean, as well as Hermione and I, my little sister, you know, arguing about it, there was really funny moments where she goes, I don't know what to do, and goes, yes, you do, Hermione. And she goes, no, I don't. I'm like, yes, you do. And she goes, yes, I do. Oh my God. And the complete trust of like, even timing, we never had to count each other in because we just like, as sisters, and we're very, very close. We never had to count each other in for anything. We just knew the rhythm of what we were going to do. And that was really sweet, actually, because we played it on my stream, and lots of people were watching, and they were like, "How are you communicating?" We're like, "We're not. We just know. I just know Hermione's thought process, and she knows mine in this like sort of circumstance,
totally.
which is really really sweet." But what also has happened is that people have like made compilations of other people playing on stream and YouTube, and like reactions to the death of the elephant, and or other things like part of that, and it's been so kind of phenomenally interesting to see how people have like it's kind of rare that what is a single player campaign-ish sort of thing, because I mean it's two people, but like that format was so successful in everyone playing it together and everyone needing someone to like get in on it, and especially because you need someone else to play it with. I think it did open up a lot of people's minds to like
And I think it was amazing timing in a weird sense in terms of the pandemic as well, where we were all being separated or whatever and isolated. That a game came along that necessitated interaction, human interaction that is actually real. And so I think that Kismet be what it was, it just came at a time that it made it sort of meaningful in a way in that sense too, because everyone was slightly lonely or whatever, or separated, or, you know, depending on their circumstances. And here was a thing that they had to do with someone else in the same room, and otherwise you can play the game.
And I think one of the things is that once everyone has finished It Takes Two, they kind of wanted more. Would you ever go back and work again on like a second
Joseph
one?
Fares, can you please
Joseph?
write
Joseph, are you here?
to 100%.
Of course we would,
Without a heartbeat's second thought.
Oh God, yeah. That's I mean, that's like you said earlier, the whole package of the game. Just working with Hazelight and working in Stockholm was just such a great experience, wasn't it? And so we need an It Takes Three now.
That would be interesting. Right?
That would be.
3.
It's funny because you've already got It Takes Two, so you can be It Takes Two too. You're not allowed
It Takes Two too.
You can't be. It
Takes
It Takes Two again. It Takes Two also.
It Takes Two Electric Boogaloo.
Do you remember when they were choosing a title for the game?
Oh, well,
when you
we
get
had a big
the scripts for a
brainstorming
game
session
initially,
about it.
and you get given, even now when you're voicing games now, you don't know. Often you finish a game and you don't even know what the real game title is. But this was called Project Hazelnuts or Hazelnuts.
Yeah, it was Hazelnut.
Hazelnuts.
Yeah.
No, it was nuts. It was just nuts.
But I found the initial email and it said hazelnuts,
It was
and then
hazelnut.
they changed it to nuts.
Yeah.
And we had to sort of say, I think that might have been a slightly top shelf magazine in the UK once. That might not be a good idea
we said,
for a game.
You can't call this game, because it went on, and then we were like, so what are you going to call the game? And they were like, well, we don't know, we're still thinking about it. I was like, we were both like, you can't call it nuts.
They were sort of fixated on the squirrel scene, and I don't know.
Yeah, and because she was like, and Joseph was like, but it's crazy, and I was like, yeah, but it's also a soft porn magazine from the 80s that is just not a strong look for a game that you want about.
It looks like a Pixar movie. No.
So family-friendly game.
Thank God they changed the name from Nuts to but It Takes Two was. I can't remember what my title was that I was really gutted they didn't choose.
I can't remember.
But I was convinced it was genius, and I can't remember what it was now.
It wasn't that good.
Clearly, It Takes Two was the right choice.
Yeah, the pun, it's.
We would love to work
with
with Joseph again, and we've said that. He's got to give us a little cameo in his next game, so we'll see if that happens.
And The Rock has bought the rights to the game. So,
What?
Yes,
yeah.
Dwayne
didn't know
Johnson.
that.
Dwayne Johnson
bought
owns the
to
rights.
game.
He bought
so this
the-
is when I
yeah.
get recast, as Kate Winslet
Yeah,
or
this
Emily
is when
Blunt.
we don't get
And,
anything to do with that movie
But I was like,
franchise
I'll
or
be
TV.
the French cab driver. I'll be the frog
Yeah.
taxi driver or something.
Yeah, it'll be, Ryan Reynolds will be playing
Yeah.
Cody, and Margot Robbie or something
Yeah,
will be you.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we won't have anything to do with it, but still.
You have to get a cameo in
We
that.
have
That
to
would
get
be
a cameo.
amazing.
We have to get a cameo. Yeah.
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 And I guess with that, it's probably a good time to ask if there are any questions and throw it out to the audience. If there's anything you'd like to ask our two wonderful guests.
Don't all shout at once.
Yeah.
Seriously. Okay.
Settle down, settle down.
No, seriously, settle down.
Earlier in the day, we heard somebody talking about AI voices and AI voices in gaming. It sounds like a lot of that is nothing that what you can do. Is that something you guys might be worried about in the industry?
100%.
Yes, very much so.
There's a huge resistance from those humans who
From actors,
are not
voiceover
AI
artists.
generated.
It's our livelihood. And
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how there's any way that you're going to get anyone in the voice industry telling you that they think it's a great idea, because basically it's what it endangers, I think, is that you have the examples of like, well, if you have someone like, I don't know, Tom say, well, if we just create Tom Cruise's voice, then he can have ownership of that and sell the rights, and it's like that's fine for Tom Cruise, but I doubt Tom Cruise gives us flying fuck because he doesn't need the money. And what I think the danger is the thousands of voice actors who aren't Tom Cruise or ever will be Tom Cruise.
Who are jobbing actors that no one's heard of, but voice a lot of games.
Who will have their voice potentially stolen, which is what I think it actually amounts to, and not reimbursed, not sold, not anything. And then you have a situation where you develop a culture where people accept that that's okay and that's good enough. And so therefore, you lose a whole industry of people who rely on that as their living. And so I think that there is an intrinsically dangerous precedent with making it okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'm involved with Equity's campaign to regulate it. I think if it gets properly monitored and regulated, then maybe there's a space for it. But quite honestly, I think that there's so much room for it to be abused that if that is the case, it will be. And so and also at the end of the day, if you're always going to be cloning people, you're always going to need someone to clone. So why are you wasting so much time cloning people when you just have all these people? What's the point? What is the point? Just hire people to do what they do. And everyone can, like, I don't understand
and have the
why.
nuance. I mean, I can see how you can get the mind the gap done. I can see how you could get, an instruction manual done. But a relationship between people and the nuances that come with character development, I don't see how you're ever going to match that. There's a certain performance
because as well,
you'll get, but you won't get.
the sort of reason for doing it seems to be entirely like, what's the benefit of it? What's the benefit seems to me fiscal. Predominantly. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about reducing the cost of something which is intrinsically unique. Everyone literally has their own voice. There's no one in the world it's like a fingerprint. Only you have your voice. And so if you have an entire industry that is based on cloning people's uniqueness, and I think that's kind of morally wrong, if you ask my personal opinion about it. I think it's dangerous. I don't see how that's moving us forward as a civilization. I don't see how that's benefiting anyone other than software manufacturers who are probably going to make a lot of money from making a lot of people unemployed. Sorry.
I would say watch your back because the next ones are game creators, maybe.
Okay.
So mine's also sort of on that point. So I know when I was growing up, there were these incredible audiobooks I used to listen to on those old cassettes, which were Chronicles of Narnia, and they had amazing Shakespearean actor reading them out, Sir Michael Hordern, and they actually recorded that he was in a physical room with this amazing flautist and the harpist, Marissa Robles, and they actually were physically co-located. And I think that in answer, there's something kind of profound about that. I'm working on a sort of meditation-based computer game, so I think the feeling of the authenticity of the people in this space, that could be like a really powerful way to say, brand that. I sort of thought you could call it like human-made or something like that. So actually specifically having a space where you're saying, look at these are the artists who did it. From a game point of view, I think that for a small indie developer, we're usually operating on almost no budget, and the ability to quickly build a demo to using these AI tools is very tempting. So that's kind of from that point of view, that's probably one of the reasons that particularly small developers will do it. I agree with the large studios, there's not really an excuse, but so it's more of a comment than a question, but maybe there's something specifically about really like marketing a game with physical footage of the people in the room together doing that, and there could be some kind of brand associated with it. So this is, we're not anti-AI, but this is what you're getting, a real human-made product. I don't know.
But I think in that situation, like, I get that if it's an internal, like, that's essentially like a pitch, right? That's like a sort of creating a demo for something that we could do if you come and invest in this idea, or, you know what I mean? Like, fine, that's okay. Like, I get that, but if you want to have the experience, if it's a meditation game of one human being in the room, whether it's with another human or a cellist, you're not going to get that with AI. Yeah. So if you're trying, if you're trying to just sell the idea to someone and you don't have any money to, like, of course, cool, use AI. But I think where it becomes dangerous is when we start to sort of put it into a finished product situation where people are like then conditioned to think that, oh, well, that's okay now. And that's acceptable, and that's good enough. So yeah, we're still going to pay the same amount of money that we would have done for that game, or that film, or that audio drama, or that audio book. And all that's happening is that larger groups or companies are making more money because they don't have to pay the voice talent. That's really the only thing that's the only outcome from that transaction. Using AI cuts out voice actors. That's the matrix of that fraction. And you know what I mean? Like, I guess that's fine if you want to go that way, but I personally, as a voice actor, find it a worrying and a very dangerous direction of travel for it to become an acceptable sort of like, that's cool. We'll take that.
There's a great thread on Twitter somewhere. I can't give you the link because this is physical space, about how AI honestly wrecked the translation industry, and Google Translate absolutely wrecked the worth of that work and people wanting to go into it. And then translators still had to do the same amount of work when people did come to them being like, oh, we can't use this because it's not accurate. And they just had to do the full amount of work
totally,
again.
like linking two things into one thing. Like as I said, I'm Mexican, and I go up for, in my acting work, a lot of Hispanic characters. Frequently, I will be sent scenes where they've used Google Translate they were like, yeah, but we want you to do these lines in Spanish. So I'm like, yeah, but you've used Google Translate, and this doesn't make any fucking sense because no one says this,
no.
right?
Yeah.
And so the same thing will end up happening in a way, but I don't know. Like, I think maybe it needs to play out, and it's kind of like I was saying to you earlier. Like, I think it's kind of like recently. I don't know if you've noticed, like on the tube, and I realized I read an article that sort of substantiated it. But I don't see many people reading off tablets anymore, like off Kindles. And apparently, the sales of Kindle books has really taken a dive, and people have like started buying books a lot more, like real books, because they kind of like. I think people basically just like that feeling of a book in their hands. And I feel that maybe AI, there's a similar vibe with that, where you're like, okay, there is always going to be a difference between something that's synthesized and something that's live, and something that's human and something that is digitally created. And I think that ultimately humans in that respect, and actors and voice artists and writers, are irreplaceable in that sense. And I think that will always win out, but I don't know why we have to have this like dance in the middle where you,
Well, it's time and
where
money,
you
isn't it? It's time and
endanger
money,
like a
that's
whole
why,
generation
yeah.
of people's livelihoods,
Yeah.
to then come back to the point where you're like, oh yeah, you know what we realized is that really humans are much better at this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that is probably the end of the talk. But thank you very much. Thank you both for
Thank
talking about your
you.
experience.
Thanks
you.
for
Thank you
staying.
so much. Thank you, the three of you.
Thanks for having us.